Geocachomaniacs.
Geo Gearheads.
Welcome to Geo Gearheads. This is a weekly podcast. We talk about geocaching and geolocation games. I'm Chris of the Northwest, along with our host, Daryl W4, and this is episode 424. Daryl, that's completely divisible by 2, in case you needed to know that. Divisible by 4 as well, and I'm sure some other numbers in there, but we're not here to talk about division. We're talking about getting things together, and tonight we are talking about refreshing the game board. The second time we're talking about it.
This is going to be a fun show, I'm sure. But going back to the 424, I got an email from one of the companies that we actually had done a first anniversary interview with.
Mm-hmm.
They're having their 8th anniversary.
Wow.
That kind of, I knew that we've been doing this. We're in our 9th season, I think it is now. Yeah, the 9th season. I know how old the show is, but that just kind of put it in perspective.
Oh, Daryl, let me tell you, back in the old days.
I had one of those kind of days, so that's probably also why. Yeah. But we do have a great show tonight with some awesome guests. And why don't we start with the person who kind of sparked this debate again, and that's Bryan, president of geocaching.com. Welcome back to the show. Well, actually, this is your first time on this show.
That's correct. It's my first time, but it's great to be here. Thank you.
And it's a pleasure having you on, and really listening to part of your interview on show 700 from Podcaster echoed a lot of what we've been talking about for the last couple of years. So I thought it'd be great to get you on and get a couple of our other guests on, including R. Reagan. Welcome back.
Pleased to be here.
Who was on our show 365 about preserving heirloom caches. Mm-hmm. And more recently, we had GSM times 2.
Hey guys, thanks for inviting me back.
And you were a co-author of the article about refreshing the game board, correct, in FTF magazine?
Actually, I think that one was my article.
That one was yours entirely? Okay. Yeah, and that was episode 418.
Yes.
That we talked about that most recently. So this is a topic near and dear to our hearts, and we've been talking about it on and off for years and years, largely because I don't have a whole lot of caches that I can go out and do. So it is a selfish situation for me. So let's start, Bryan, by what kind of prompted you to speak out about refreshing the game board?
Well, as you mentioned, I was on the Podcaster 700th episode, and I believe that Sonny had asked kind of things that we're thinking about going forward. And given that this is the 20th year of geocaching, one of the things we were talking about is just the fact that, there are in certain areas saturation issues. There are issues in areas where, for avid geocachers, they found most if not all of the caches in their area, and they're having to travel further and further away to go find new caches. Excuse me. There are also, we know caches in a state of disrepair and cache owners who have not been around for years, and maybe they came to the game, found out about a place to cache, and they just haven't been back. And so we said, how can we look at this game board, the world essentially, and all the caches that are out there, and just come up with some ideas and maybe work with the community to go out and create a little bit of a refresh, get rid of some of the, not the quality caches, but get rid of some of the caches that are, let's say, a little bit lame or no longer maintained, or if there's an absentee cache owner that hasn't been around for 5-6 years. I think cache ownership is something that comes with a lot of joy and benefits, and you read the logs from people and you see the photos and you kind of get to share in the results of what you've created. And if the cache owner is no longer available or no longer participating, maybe there's an opportunity there to have a new cache owner. That in that particular case, you get a new cache in the area that people can go find. You get a new cache owner who is hopefully determined to keep it as a well-maintained cache and just create better opportunities for geocaching in different areas around the world. So that's really what spurred the discussion. And it's really been kind of a thought process around here. We've been thinking about how we might do this. And, I know we've been asking the community, and we've been, we just ran a test that I think we can talk about in a little bit in the southeast of the United States, just to see, what can we learn? Part of it is we recognize that we don't have all of the great ideas, and we may not even have all of the right ideas. And so how can we test our way into creating a better system? So, where we are now is really, we did this test, we've learned some things, and we can talk about that a little bit. And I think the long-term goal is, how do we create a better game for the community to enjoy? And this is one aspect that we think after 20 years is probably pretty important for us to at least tackle, or at least start tackling. So that's where we're at today.
Okay.
Excellent. Now, our Reagan has been advocating for preservation of what you were calling the heirloom caches, those special caches. So why don't you give us a quick summary of what that is?
Status update. That show was a year and 3 months ago, so we've had a fair bit of data point there. When we had that show, there were 113 year 2000 caches live in the world. I'm pleased to say there are still 113 of those. And I'm going to let Bryan say perhaps maybe why that is in just a second. The other date-driven cache that people often make it their Mount Everest kind of thing to do is the original Physi challenge. And it has a date limit on it because it was originally created with one to keep people from messing with it by putting out things that had DTs that weren't wanted to be eligible. And so it has a date challenge of April 6, 2007, but what that means is that things start to die off before that date, and it gets progressively harder to achieve. Just ask Rock Chalk how important it is. Read his log about the finding of that one. It'll tell you what people think about it. I had the pleasure of hiking out to it with the 4 of the cachers from the GGA, Poan and Geomucky Tiger, and 2 more people. For when I went to get it last year. It really is a special thing. But in that same year and 3 months, for those original Physis that have less than 100 left in the world, a number of them, 7 in particular, have declined from that number. They've lost candidates. The most endangered one has 30 left in the world, and it still has 30 left in the world. So that one's okay, but that's the most endangered one. Right now, there's nothing in place to look at maybe making sure that Mount Everest of Physi challenges might have some help to keep things that are right down. I mean, don't worry about the ones with thousands, no problem. But there's a handful of DT combos which maybe need a little bit of preservation to make it still doable for people years from now. So we're in pretty good shape with the policies coming out of GCHQ regarding the year 2000 ones. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Bryan.
Sure. Well, for starters, as you mentioned, the preservation of the year 2000 caches was something that we just did, a little over a year ago, something like that. And if you think about it, that means that it took us like 18 to 19 years to realize that we need to do something there. And the basics are that GCHQ reached out to the cache owners of those 113 caches. And essentially we said, look, we recognize that these are special. There's only 113 of these essentially first year caches out there. And we want to make an effort to make sure that they are preserved. And what that means is that if you're a cache owner of one of these caches, we want to give you the opportunity to effectively create kind of a geo will, which is you let us know that if for some reason you are no longer available for whatever reason or participating in the game, if you as a cache owner are comfortable with us being able to adopt that cache over, please give us permission to do that. Again, we talk about cache ownership as ownership. So without that permission, it's something that we're not comfortable saying, oh, this cache owner has passed away and we don't have authority from the next of kin or something like that. How can we transfer ownership in the right way? And there's really, the right way is with permission. And so what we did was we reached out and we worked with those cache owners to get effectively permission to preserve those caches. And I think you raise a good point with the DTs. Like, we know that this is important. I haven't had a discussion here recently about that, but I can tell you that if it's on Rock Chalk's radar, then we're certainly having the conversation internally at HQ. And just because I'm not necessarily a part of it, it could still be taking place. And I think that the things that are really important to geocachers, and particularly those things that have the potential to go away, are things that as a company we should be focusing our attention on finding ways to preserve them. And one of the things that I mentioned to a few of you guys before the show is I just had a conversation with somebody here at HQ on the CVS team, which is the Community Volunteer Support Team. And something that should be noted for any cache owner out there is, if for some reason, well, not if for some reason, one of the things that you can do as a cache owner is you can express your intent in terms of what you want to happen to your caches in your absence by putting something on your profile. So if you know that, hey, there's a chance you're not going to be around in the future, which technically we all know, maybe you want to, if you so choose, you can go onto your profile page and say, in the event that I'm incapacitated, or if I pass away, or if I haven't been to the site in X number of years and there's an interest in preserving my cache, I hereby give permission to GCHQ to either transfer it to a particular person or transfer it at will to somebody who's willing to maintain it. And I think that when the time comes, if it is a cache that we deem worthy of preserving, and let's say not every cache needs to be preserved, but if it's one of those, maybe one of those 30 in the DT combination that needs to be preserved, it'd be nice for us to know before that cache is archived, somebody's going to check the profile page. And if that, we're going to try and reach the next of kin, we're going to try and reach a spouse or whatever to get consent to preserve it. But in the absence of that, as a cache owner, it's something that you can do to make sure that we have the option of preserving it, which I think is really our best shot of making that happen.
Okay.
We had an interesting question in the chat, and I'm not sure if you actually have the answer at the ready, but RG asked, why can't abandoned caches be adopted by others without the original cache owner involved? Put in an adoption center for 6 months before archiving it.
I think it really comes down to ownership. It's that cache container is the cache owner's property. That content that they submitted, even though we, technically in the terms of use, we take a perpetual irrevocable license to, use it for probably any and all purposes and things like that. I can't give you permission. I can't say, hey, cache owner A's property is now your property without their consent. It just doesn't work that way. I think that there are some, laws in terms of abandoned property that may apply, but there's also the social aspect of it.
Yeah.
How would the community feel if we said, hey, by the way, we reserve the right to transfer your cache, at our discretion to somebody else? I think that a lot of people would object to that potentially. And we've talked about adding sections of that to the terms of use and things like that. We just haven't done it because there's some discomfort with the thought of kind of altering property laws and things like that. So that's the short answer. We can't force an adoption without consent. We could potentially obtain consent in a in a terms of use, but that's not a step that we've been comfortable taking up to this point.
What I suspect a lot of the problem too comes from the fact this is global, and a lot of those kind of regulations are regional.
And here's another thing that we've thought about is, while my lights might go out, I'm gonna wait a little bit. There we go. While we may be the largest geocache listing service in the world, we're not the only one. Mm-hmm. So, we know that there's some percentage of caches and cachers, and I think it's a relatively small percentage, but that have cross-listed their caches on other sites. So maybe they're no longer participating on our site, and maybe they're on one of the open caching sites or something like that. And again, if we say, hey, cacher B, cacher A's caches are now yours, and you're going out and hey, I'm going to swap out the container, I think cacher A could be rightfully pissed off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. So if you have important geocaches, you should contact a geocaching lawyer and have a geocaching will made.
Or just post it on your profile.
Or do it yourself. Yes, there you go.
Yeah. Just let us know what you want us to do. Because again, if it's an expression of the cache owner's intent, effectively like a living will,
right?
Then that gives us the permission.
Exactly.
Nobody's going to come back and say, oh, they weren't okay with it. It's clearly they were okay with it. So that provides a level of comfort
right.
that makes it a little bit easier to deal with.
Exactly. And, who's to say if somebody doesn't log in for 6 months that they're inactive? Maybe, or they're incapacitated, or they're not into geocaching anymore. It could just be a device problem. They're traveling, what have you. At what point do you say, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 18 months? At what point do you say, okay, now we consider this abandoned and move on? And maybe that just doesn't fit into that particular person's time frame. So,
right. And we want to be careful not to get it wrong, because getting it wrong is, it's almost an issue of fairness. So we tread carefully when we can, especially when it comes to cache ownership and kind of community sentiment in general, despite maybe what folks might think.
UDEC is proposing some language for the cache page, I believe. I, being of sound mind and body, leave my cache to my muggle husband to force him to try.
I like it.
I like it too.
I like it. I think that'll work.
Meanwhile, Houston, Texas Dave is going to will his caches to you, Bryan, when he passes away.
Well, if they're in Texas, maintenance might be a challenge, but I can, Houston, Texas Dave.
Yep. Okay. How about?
Oh, but he's going to will all of the swag in his caches to me.
Nice. All right. Got to leave something though.
I think I can arrange that.
Right on.
But I have to get to the caches first.
Exactly.
All right. So GSM time 2, you haven't had a chance to pipe up yet.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So here's what I'd like to pipe up. Earlier last night, I put out on a Facebook page something promoting this podcast, and I just I think people who are listening, they're going to understand a couple things about refreshing the game board. One, refreshing the game board is not archiving every geocache from 2004 to 2017. It's certainly not getting rid of something like Mingo or any other Jasmer significant geocache, or even the DT significant geocaches. It looks like we're going to work towards that direction. For me, my vision of refreshing the game board, I put in a magazine article just under thoughts, and then in the last 4 months, I've been tweaking it and actually putting it in practice out there when I'm doing my maintenance runs. And so it's also not my vision is not that's not going to threaten the lonely caches, the old caches. Those are still out there. And, my vision is that we're going to make the game better by replacing, as Bryan says, some of the stale, some of the things that have been out there. And I'm really looking forward to having this discussion and seeing what everybody else's vision is, especially Bryan's, of course, because he's going to drive it.
Well, I'm going to help. There's quite a few people at HQ that'll actually be more involved in driving it, and there's some really active, very active cachers here, and so the concerns that are shared by the community are also shared internally here at HQ. We don't want to mess this game up. I saw the post from somebody about, we're going to archive all the caches from 2004, whatever it was. And I don't know. I was hoping that was a joke, because I'd like to believe that folks out there don't think we're that silly, that we would be that foolish to do something, or that we would risk damaging the game in that way. We're trying to do the right thing for the game, and I don't know, that felt like a silly comment.
That felt like a comment that should have come from the news group that you guys have.
There's a thread on the blog discussing this whole topic too, if you want.
Yes,
I could see some
I don't.
opinions. Yeah,
I don't.
I mean, everybody has their own opinion, and I think that there are times where, look, we're not a perfect company. We haven't done everything right perfectly over 19 plus years. As nice as it would be to say that we have been, it's not reality. And so not everybody agrees with every decision we've made. Not everybody agrees with every policy or implementation we've made. And I think that sometimes folks like to take a shot at the company. And I think from behind a keyboard, that's easy. And I think also maybe the folks who don't know us personally, maybe it's like Geocaching HQ or Groundspeak is just this faceless corporation, and how dare they do what they're doing that I disagree with from their high tower. And it's just not reality. But I think over the years we have learned to understand that that's human nature. People are going to do it. And as much as admittedly I probably took it really personally in the early days, like every nasty comment, at this point it's like, all right, if there's something that I can do to understand it, I really do want to understand it. If we don't want people to be unhappy, this is a game about having fun and getting outside and making our lives all better through this creation, sharing, and playing together. Mm-hmm. The last thing we want is to piss people off.
Brian, what I would say is, you got 1 million players out there. If you're 98% of them are happy, you still have 200,000 people pissed off at, or 20,000 people pissed off at you.
It's the old adage, like, you just can't please everybody.
And the happy people don't comment.
Yeah,
they comment less. I do appreciate, hearing from the happy people every now and then. We've got a board at HQ that have letters from community members, and last year what the podcasters and bloggers did of the thanks HQ was really wonderful, and it's nice to see that sometimes the happy vocal people speak up, but by and large, like, we really know they're out there. We read the logs, we see the photos, and to some degree those things carry us through. Like, even in some of the dark days, maybe where we make a mistake or we've done something that we have to walk back, we know that most of the people are actually out there understanding and recognizing that we're human and that we are really doing our best with the best of intentions.
Okay.
Yeah. Any product review you read, you look, you've got the people who love it, the people who hate it. Everyone who's in the middle really doesn't say anything.
Right.
So you tend to only get the two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
I would think Bryan should have John F. Kennedy's saying all over his office. You can make some of the people happy all the time. Yep.
We do have, and you guys may have heard this before. This is in Jeremy's old office, which is 2 offices in that direction. It's a sign that's been here for many years, and it says, "Let's make better mistakes tomorrow."
Yep.
And it's part of the philosophy. And actually, when he stepped down and stopped working, daily at HQ, he took the sign home with him because it was something that he brought here, and it was part of sort of his office decorations. Mm-hmm. And we said, that mantra is important enough, and we went out and we bought a new one, and it's right where it used to be. But
Right.
it is something that we talk about and that we think about. And again, nobody's perfect. We are doing our best. And if we make a mistake, the only thing that we could really do is learn from it and try and do better next time. And understand that some people get that and some people are going to be a little less forgiving, and that's just okay.
Tell us about your Georgia, North Carolina experiments.
Sure. So as part of thinking through how we could make better mistakes tomorrow, nice. As part of thinking about what we could do, we decided that we would do an experiment and see how it would work. And I actually have some notes here with some statistics that there's no way I would recall offhand, so I'll do what I can. Basically, the hypothesis was that cachers who have not been involved in the game for a long period of time, that their caches, unless they were really great caches, would not be well maintained and really wouldn't be found all that often, and maybe should just be cleared out. So we created an algorithm that would help us identify, and specifically what we looked for this test was cache owners who have not logged in on the website or logged a cache in 5+ years. So we said, all right, we talked earlier, is it 6 months, a year, 2 years? We said, let's be super conservative. 5 years, we haven't seen or heard from them. So CO's inactive for 5 years. We pulled the data and we noticed that, and this was for Georgia and North Carolina, we noticed that there were some of those caches that had trackables in them. And we said, okay, let's pull those caches out, because archiving a cache with a trackable could cause problems for perhaps an active cacher. And since this is a test, let's be super conservative. And so what we ended up with is 757 caches in North Carolina, which represented 3.42%. These are the percentages that I would never remember if I didn't write them down. 3.42% of active caches in North Carolina, 293 caches in Georgia, which is 2.12% of caches. It's a relatively small percentage, but again, this wasn't about let's go clean up the game board in Georgia and North Carolina. This is how can we test our way in and see what the results are, see what we can learn from it. So we sent emails to the cache owners for all of those caches, and we basically said, not your cache isn't maintained and it's going away. We said, look, we haven't seen you in a while, and in an effort to create a better game board for geocaching, we just want to find out, are you still around? So what we're going to do is we are going to temporarily disable your cache, and we're going to ask that if you're still around and you're still actively engaged and you're willing to maintain this cache, go back in and re-enable it, and we're good. And if you do that, we consider that cache active again, and we don't have a problem. If you don't want to maintain the cache, or if you're really not active, either take no action or write to us and let us know, hey, I'm really not active. You can archive my cache, you can adopt it. Ideally I'll go pick up the container, something like that. And what we did was we heard from some geocachers, and for the most part, we didn't hear from a lot of those geocachers. One thing to note, and I have this, let's see. Oh, the open rate on those emails was 31% within the first week. So that's actually a high open rate for any sort of email. But what it meant is that at least a third of the people, give or take, opened the email and read it from us. So, okay, that's interesting. It was pretty quiet in terms of the other feedback that we heard. We actually heard from one person in the community who is not a cache owner, and they basically said, I've been maintaining this cache because the cache owner isn't around, and this is actually exciting to me. Like, I like the idea of it going away. Can I place a new cache there when it's gone? We said, Sure. If we don't hear from the cache owner and we archive the cache, absolutely, we'd love to see that. That's the flip side of can we create more opportunities for people to go out and find caches? So that, that's one example. One of the things some of the things that we learned. Well, first of all, as of I think 30 days.
A couple more days.
What's that?
About the 15th of the month, by my reckoning.
Yeah, so 30 days basically ends this Saturday. And our plan is, we're not doing it on Saturday, but probably Monday or Tuesday, our plan is to archive those caches. And the truth is, like, if we archive the cache and we hear from a cache owner, 24 hours later or 48 hours later, and they're like, hey, I'm totally sorry, I missed the email, I'm actually active, I don't log my finds or whatever it is, and I really do want this cache to be unarchived, there's a pretty good chance we're going to unarchive it. Because, we're not looking to do damage here. And again, this is a test for learning. One of the things that I think we learned is the algorithm that we created doesn't necessarily account for the find rate. So one of the things I talked about on Podcaster was, look, if you're a cache owner, and this is another aspect of, whoa, one second. I don't know if you guys could hear that.
Oh, we can. Sounds like
yeah.
you're having an earthquake.
That's a Chinook helicopter, the twin.
Oh,
Those things are so cool.
black helicopters coming.
They've heard me talking about archiving one of the cache. But yeah, that was a Chinook helicopter.
Okay.
Fascinating to see them. But so the flip side of it is, this was something that I said on the Podcaster episode as well, is if you're a cache owner and you placed your cache, say, a year ago or 2 years or 5 years or more, what we know is that new caches, the find rate is as high as it's going to be in the first 30 to 60 days. And after that, it's going to slow down. When all the locals have found it and all the active cache finders, it's going to slow down. And so what we said is, if you're the owner of a cache and maybe that cache is in a cool spot and maybe it's really well maintained, but hey, nobody's finding it anymore, well, consider archiving the cache. We ask that when you place the cache, it's out there for a minimum of 3 months and you're placing it for longevity. But realistically, if it's a year or 2 years or 3 years, maybe archive the cache. Maybe invite a new player to hide a cache at that location. Maybe share the positive experience of cache ownership, or maybe consider placing a new cache yourself. And that doesn't mean like archive the listing, place a new listing, leave the same container there with the same swag, but maybe use the opportunity to create a new experience for finders. And in that way, even individual cache owners, you don't have to be gone from the game to help contribute to the refreshing of the game board. So one of the things that we learned is in the algorithm, as I said, we generated, there were, say, a little more than 1,000 caches were affected in these 2 states. It may be different in different areas. One of the things that we did actually was we looked at a couple of other random areas. I don't remember all of them. I do remember one of them was in Belgium. And we ran the same algorithm for, I don't know if they have states or provinces or whatever. I'm not 100% sure, but it came back, there was one cache that was identified, just one. And we said, okay, perhaps this area doesn't have the issue. And maybe if the algorithm was different, it would identify more. But based on what we were looking for, which was that inactive cache owners for 5 years, in a particular area, no trackables, there weren't a lot there. So this may apply differently to different areas in the world. Perhaps some areas are better at self-policing. My understanding is that there's maybe it's a group in Vancouver, BC, that does some active policing, and after a certain period of time in a certain area, you're expected to archive your cache and let somebody else place it, so that there's this constant refreshing. We're not at the level where we're ready to roll out a program like that. Again, this is preliminary, but the other part of this program is kind of spreading the message and just talking to people. And I think everybody who has a cache out there should consider, is my cache still providing joy to the community? Is it still valuable? And if not, there's a number of options for how that can change. And I think if we get enough people thinking about it, well, all of a sudden there's a lot more caches for Daryl to go find in his neighborhood.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
It's interesting, the stats I ran on Georgia and North Carolina, they're not quite your numbers, but I think the sense is about the same. In both cases, which was a little surprising, roughly half of the caches which were targeted for disabled were having a fairly steady find rate.
Yeah, and
Fits your point there.
Yep.
Yep.
Fairly steady find rate. And what I don't know as a fact, but what is a steady find rate? Is that once a month?
What did I see here? In case of North Carolina, there was 300 and a third. Half of them had been found in the last year. Whatever that means, right? Yeah.
I mean, if it's found once in the last year, that doesn't feel like a steady find rate. That feels
it doesn't. The numbers are, well, they're all in the notes. I have more details of how often things are being found, but we don't want to dive into that right now.
Sure. But I think in theory, like we all understand, if a cache is found once a year, unless it's it's a 3-day hike into the mountains and it's a, more of a lonely cache type of situation, hey, that's fine. It's probably still going to be found once a year if we replace it with a new cache. So what's really the benefit of that? But if it's a cache in a highly trafficked urban area that maybe has, local significance, where it's a tourist destination and that cache is still found once a year, well, then maybe it's time for the cache to be swapped out. Maybe
I've got a better number for Georgia. 108 of the number you quoted were found in the last 3 months.
Okay, so 108 out of 293.
Yep.
So that means that, say, give or take 200 caches of those caches haven't been found in 3 months.
Right.
So, I can't tell you where they're located. I don't have that level of data at this point. But if those are in an area that has a lot of cacher activity, well, that's not so frequent. What would it be? You place a new cache there, maybe it gets found 100 times in 3 months or 300 times in 3 months. And again, if our goal as a company and a community is to create the types of experiences that get people off of their couches and away from their televisions and outside playing, are we comfortable collectively with 200 caches not being found in a period of 3 months? Can we do better? It's not can HQ do better, it's can all of us do better.
Sure.
And the fact is, I think we all agree there's an opportunity to make some improvement here. How we do that is going to be a matter of testing our way into it and getting feedback and listening to the community and listening to the cache owners and seeing who takes action and who is not willing to take action.
And part of that is it's up to the individual, individual in two ways. One, I really am an advocate of log your DNFs, make comments. If you see things coming up, the entire community should get into making logs and using the tools that are already available to the community. We don't have to go through GCHQ, and go ahead and get those things recognized that they're not there, that the owners are inactive or the owners are irresponsible. Don't replace other people's caches. Don't maintain other people's caches unless you have specific permission to do that. And that's one way that the community can help refresh the game board. And then the other way is for the individuals to decide, hey, I want to go ahead and as I have done in the last 4 months, when I go check them, I make a decision. The first thing I do is I check, what's the significance of this geocache? Are there other geocaches that were set on the same month, the same year as this geocache? And, I'm going to give 3 quick stories. One, I go to, it's just an LPC that I had adopted. I go there. there's 13 geocaches. One of them I'm even in charge of that were set in the same month and year. So I go ahead, look around, and guess what? I find a better place to put another geocache. I put that geocache in that's archived. This is going, and away we go. We got a better cache. The game has been improved. Second geocache I go to, I check, and by gosh, there's not a geocache set in that month and year for 49.6 miles, and it's an entire different county. That cache is missing. I just go ahead and replace it exactly as it was. It lives on because I think it has some significance in a Jasmer challenge. The third geocache I go to, it's been marked missing, and it clearly, I think it's there, but it's not where I hit it, and I'm able to find it. It's a prime candidate for being replaced. It's a pill bottle that I set on a streak that I was setting where I was hiding a cache a day. There's nothing special about it. It's called Back to Nature because the big old sign for Lake Casitas was Back to Nature. That sign has been replaced. So I take it back to the car and, I'm just going to get a new container. I'm going to put something out there. I open it up and it's a 9-year-old cache. And there's the original log in good shape, readable, signable. And by gosh, all of a sudden it has a little sentimental value to me, and I put it right back where it was.
All right.
So let the individual, I'm encouraging the individuals to make their own decisions. And if we can get 20% or 30% of the individuals out there, when they maintain their cache, make their own individual decision, I think the game improves.
I mean, cache maintenance is an important part of cache ownership, and
yes, it is.
As a community, well, as a company, it's difficult for us to hold the hundreds of thousands of cache owners responsible for maintenance. We do have tools, as you mentioned, and hopefully people are using them. I think if we do all of the things that we're talking about, this game stands a better chance of being more fun for people. Mm-hmm. So that's the end goal.
Yeah, the other side of that is something that you all took on last year in terms of the cache creation and carnival and things like that. It's the other way is not to just get rid of bad caches, but to create more new ones that don't exist yet for people to find. Yep. And so encouraging people who've not hidden to learn how to hide, training events to teach how to create a cache, how to hide a cache, maintain a cache, can go a long ways towards adding to the game board in a positive way as opposed to taking things off.
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking to get rid of a whole lot of caches without replacing them.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't help anybody.
No.
The end goal is if we can improve the level of caches that are out there. So caches, people use the word lame sometimes, and I think it's subjective. Mm-hmm. But take if I'm a cache owner and I have a little micro in the woods, we all know maybe there's an opportunity to put a bigger cache container there, or a much larger cache container. How can I create a better experience? And if we get every individual thinking about how can I create a better experience for finders, well, then we have a really good opportunity of having a better experience out there.
Even a lamp, there are cute lamppost caches where you lift it up and there's a little city down there. It's getting a little bit creative. Exactly.
I like lampposts. I'll admit it. I do. And there's something fun about, like, I don't know, at least for me, if I'm in a new area and I pull into a parking lot and I see the typical lamp skirt sitting out there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find this one. Like, I know it's got to be something's, familiar to me.
If you're a county cacher, they're important to you because you can grab them quick and keep going.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is absolutely the diversity of this game that makes this game.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Diversity of the people, the caches, the experiences. That's the beauty of it. And especially when you look at it on a global scale, here we are having this conversation. There's all over the world, people are having conversations about these types of things, all because of the community.
Absolutely.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
but nobody gets joy out of finding a cache that's full of water with a soggy, and especially when you look back and there's the previous three logs talked about I couldn't sign the cache.
Mhm.
So that's where, again, the community, don't put it there. Don't put it in your log. Go ahead and make the extra effort to put a needs maintenance out there, so the person will get a separate email. And, same thing with the DNFs. When you get 4 DNFs in a row, that's an appropriate time to put needs archived so that it can go to the local reviewer, who can then review it and see if it's legitimate to go ahead and start the process.
The health score should kick in there somewhere too.
It does.
Yeah, but the health score if I'm correct, the health score doesn't go to the reviewer. It just kicks out something. It's automatically kicked out by GCHQ.
Yeah,
the cache owner.
The cache owner, but also we have a tool that we make available to reviewers that helps to identify low health caches in their area. And our goal is to make it easy for them to action them and, alert the cache owner, hey, your cache needs some maintenance. If you don't maintain it within a certain amount of time, you risk having it disabled or archived. And, we're always trying to improve the tools. And I think in the last couple of years, between the health score and I think it's called the sweeper tool, we're trying to make it easier to action those things. And it's not a perfect system. None of it is perfect, but making progress in the right direction, I think, just goes a long way.
And I have a lot of faith in the human eye to make the determination on whether it's healthy or not. And better than the algorithm. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, well, of course. And you have to recognize that, well, that's why it doesn't work like the health score goes down and then all of a sudden we archive the cache programmatically. The health score goes down and then we ask the reviewers to take a look and say, because the health score could be affected by a lot of things, but DNFs is one of them. So if you get a cache that is, maybe it's in really good shape, but man, it's hard to find. Well, if people are posting DNFs, we don't want to archive that cache.
No.
Somebody has to take a look at it and they say, oh, I know this cache. This isn't a problem cache. This is just a hard to find cache, so we're not going to action it. And that's where having volunteers, act in the capacity of like the eyes that take a look at it, or having the local knowledge. We can't go out and inspect every cache. There's just no way. As much as it'd be nice to do that kind of travel, nobody's got that kind of time or resources. But having community members around the world and having community volunteers around the world who are willing to put in the time to really make a better game board, those are the ones that are going to help us deal with the false positives. There is no perfect algorithm. Well, we will acknowledge that. So we do our best. And we rely on assistance from the community.
Yep.
I'm seeing who is New York admin.
Yep. Little training session over here.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah, we've had a very active chat room tonight, and they brought up the same kind of concerns about the DNFs. Yeah, it could be a very challenging cache. It could be a group of 4.
Yep.
So as good as the algorithm can be, it can't really take into account for some of that stuff.
Yep.
It's true. It's really true.
Yeah.
Good night, Houston, Texas, Dave.
Bye.
So when we started talking about the refreshing the game board, it was really about the responsibility of ourselves as cache owners to refresh our caches, get rid of them, put out new ones, open it up, whatever. So rather than refreshing a cache, replacing a cache that might be damaged or whatever, take a look at that and see if it's actually worth replacing. And in the previous discussions, we figured out that's a lot harder to figure out if it's worth replacing or not than we originally thought, largely because of these issues over the age of the cache, the DT grids, that kind of thing. So it's not something that you can just say, okay, this cache is 2 or 3 years old, I'm going to archive it unless someone else puts something new in there.
Right.
It is, and it really is. Again, been living it for 5 months. It's difficult, but try it and see if you can do it. And then and I haven't done it on. I haven't expanded it to caches that are currently not. They're all being found and so forth. I'm just doing it on my maintenance runs.
Yeah.
And I found it interesting. I found it difficult. But I found it rewarding to go ahead and, that cache is okay. It's broken. I could fix it, or I could archive it. And if I archive it, am I going to replace it myself, or am I going to let somebody else, just open up the space, and perhaps someone else will come in and do it.
Yep.
Or open the space. Maybe there's a cacher who might be interested in learning how to place a cache, and maybe it's an opportunity for you to share with them, like, hey, it looks like you haven't placed a cache yet. There's some really cool things that you can gain from placing a cache. Let me help you understand how to do it the right way.
Sure. I'll add that to my repertoire of, had one that I archived, and there were like 7 different places to put it. And that would be a great place to take a newbie or somebody who hasn't hidden caches and say, here's our options, and what do you want to do with this?
Yeah.
Great idea.
I think it's important to note that, as you said, it could be challenging to know, is this worth preserving or not? And the truth is, we don't have to get this 100% right. Mm-hmm. That's actually that's impossible to do. But what happens if we get it 10% right? If we refresh to 15%, 20%, that's game changing, literally and figuratively. It's game changing. So I think just starting the effort and just starting to share the theories around it and the thoughts, and having us continue with some of these experiments. I saw one of the comments, any further testing, or are we awaiting the results? Well, we did the first test. It's probably, comes to some form of conclusion on Monday or Tuesday when we actually archive those. But I think afterwards, we probably want to give it a couple weeks or at least some amount of time to say, are there repercussions that have occurred that we didn't anticipate?
Yep.
Is there some other lesson to be learned in what we did before we jump right in and try it again? But long term, I think that, we understand what the goal is. There are probably some tweaks we can make to the algorithm. There's probably some improvements to overall communication that we could do. But this is something that we're actively considering, and we think that it's worth doing for the benefit of everybody. So, what does the future look like? I'm not exactly sure, but I think that as a company, we will be focused on trying to address this.
So, Brian, I'll just be a devil's advocate here. But if you're going to archive them, what's the difference between archiving somebody's property and putting it out for adoption? If you're going to archive it anyways, could you put it out to the community looking for someone to adopt it, even if the adoption is, it's understood that I'm going to go pick that up and remove it and check and see if it's there and remove the geolitter or whatever. What's the difference?
The primary difference is that, technically speaking, geocaching.com is a publishing tool. So if you hide a cache and you submit it, you're basically saying, hey, I hid this cache. This is an experience I've created. I am asking GCHQ to publish that on the geocaching website so that other people could find it. We can choose as a publisher to say, hey, listen, you're not playing by the rules. You're not maintaining it. You're not active. You're not meeting the requirements or the expectations for cache ownership as we define them. And so we are making a choice to no longer publish your cache. Mm-hmm. That's different from saying we're going to give it to somebody else. So that's really the fundamental distinction between the two.
Thank you.
Question on your algorithm. I saw traditionals, multis, and a few puzzles that were hit. Did it hit any other icon? Did it look at other icon types? They were excluded. Does it do challenge caches?
my understanding, at least from my conversation earlier, and I don't know that it's all encompassing, but I know that we excluded virtuals and earth caches definitely, because for obvious reasons there's no
Right.
maintenance required necessarily. I don't know about other cache types. Not
Okay,
all.
challenges are an interesting case because they have a life that's quite a bit longer and typically a relatively simple container in many cases, because you go sign it and then you come back in a year when you've met the challenge and you sign the found it, for
Right.
example. And so particularly the older ones, because they were not under constraints of the later revision of the challenge rules. And so very interesting things out there that people enjoy, but they can no longer be created again.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how we looked at those with respect to this test. I know that, and Annie, I don't know if webcams were also excluded. I'm not
yes.
sure. But there's not many of them out there, so
Under 100 in the U.S.
yeah, I know. Hopefully we excluded those, but the problem with webcams, as we know, some of them are pretty much gone. The webcams are no longer active. It's nice that there's 100 left. Personally, I would love to see I'd love to see us do something with them, like similar maybe to virtual rewards that we did. I can tell you, I don't think that that's going to happen in 2020 because we've got our hands full with a lot of other things. But I on a personal level, not that it's my decision necessarily, but I'd like to see webcams preserved in some way.
Yes.
I think a lot of people agree with you, and I've certainly heard a lot of people praise the virtual reward and hope that it would go over towards a webcam. I think the virtual rewards were highly successful. People given one opportunity are not going to mess with it. People given one opportunity for a webcam are not going to mess with it.
I think it helped to solve the problem of virtuals in a way that it just wasn't easy to solve otherwise. And so, the end result, I think, worked out pretty well. I'd love to see more of those too. People really love them, and it's a different aspect of the game that prior to virtual rewards, there were countries that had almost none of them.
Sure.
Right.
And now, given the way that we rolled it out, I think it was positively received by almost everybody. Not everybody's happy, but that's how it works. I agree with you guys. I think that it was one of the better things that we've done over the past few years and really helped to produce some more excitement within the community. So there's more opportunities for that going forward, I'm sure.
Sure. It's another way to freshen up the game.
It is.
Yes, it is.
Might want to give it to somebody who advocates refreshing the game. I'd love to have one. If you're going to talk to the guy, you might as well do a little,
maybe
little self-promotion.
He can't be bribed, I'm sure.
I know he can't be bribed.
Here's what's interesting is that the easiest thing for me to say is actually the truth, and that is I don't get to decide.
Right.
And really as a company, we don't want to make individual decisions. We'd rather say, look, this is an imperfect algorithm, but we're going to do our best. And so there's an element of luck to it. And I think that in fairness to everybody, that, you don't want to find out that the friend of Groundspeak got some special dispensation. I have a really good buddy who's active geocacher in Munich, and he was talking about a Adventure Lab credit, and he put in the the listing that we had, like this, not the lottery, but he put in for one when we first put it out. And at some point, like 2 months ago, he wrote to me and he's like, "Hey Bryan, I got one of these." And I said, "Congratulations." And he said, "I assume you had nothing to do with it." And I said, "That's absolutely correct. And knowing you you wouldn't want me to have anything to do with it. You want to play the way everybody else gets to play. And he's like, you're absolutely right. He said, I wouldn't want to accept it if I knew that I was getting special treatment. And maybe not everybody feels that way, but it I think fairness is important. And so doing it with an algorithm, making our best efforts, making better mistakes tomorrow, trying to get it right. We're not going to always get it right, but we are going to do our best.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate it. It's been a great show. And I was so excited to have you guys on. I think summed it up beautifully. Can I point out how weird it is for Daryl and Chris to be so quiet tonight, but great to hear everything Bryan has to say.
It's good to hear from all of you. Honestly, I really enjoy the conversation. We should do this again sometime, please.
Yeah,
Really
I think
half
this was
material.
yeah, I don't think it was even half. But yeah, this was, I knew going to be a great discussion, and hopefully it gets a lot of people thinking. Chris, I think you had a couple more comments that you wanted to talk about.
There were a couple of comments in the chat. I'm going to hit RG's right here. What is happening with the AR caches?
Let's say that we did the experiment last year. There's more to come. We're not, I think we recognize that AR is a tool that can be incorporated into geocaching in some form. We are actively thinking about it, and we are actively working on aspects of it. So again, without I would say I'm not giving away too much. I actually don't have all the answers, but I do expect that there will be more to come in 2020.
Okay. Well, that's a perfectly good answer. And here's another question you may not have prepared for, but Wet Coaster wants to know, how is the great story and helpful indicators on logs doing? The trial in Canada and I believe Norway.
And with Cachely users.
Yeah, I think it's doing well. I really do. And it's funny, we got to test it in the really early days, and we don't have access to it now. But I had gone in, I want to say I was reading one of Rock Chalk's logs, and I was like, this is a great story. Like, where do I kind of upvote this? And I was like, oh, it's not there yet. It's something that I don't know specifically. I think it's working positively. I would like to see us do more with it. I'd like to see us roll it out further. At the same time, I know that we have a really robust roadmap for 2020. There's a lot of stuff that we are going to be working on. And while, I don't know how quickly it will get further within the game or when that might happen. On a personal level, I'd love to see it happen, but I'm not sure when it's going to happen.
Very good answer. Those were the questions I had, Daryl. And Ian, to get back to your comment, it's odd to have us so quiet when we have such good guests.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
Okay, we'll let you get one more in.
Any update on the leaderboard experiments that you were doing?
We're still doing them.
Okay.
We're still doing them. There's I want to say there's a couple of organizations that are using the leaderboard now. And we've worked with a couple of companies on it. I actually have a conversation sometime tomorrow to discuss it a little bit more about some potential opportunities to test it. I know that the team that built the functionality did some recent updates to allow us to do more testing with it. And now they are moving on to a different project that I think is really exciting, but I can't talk about it. Sorry.
All right. Thank you.
You tease. We're going to have to bring you back on then to talk more about it when you can.
Look, if I'm being honest, I would say that I think the future is bright. Honestly, I think that there's there's some really good opportunities for us to enhance the tool set that we give to the community that allows people to create, share, and play. We talked about AR as a possibility. I'm personally really excited by what I'm seeing with the Adventure Lab application. I thought some of the stuff that we did last summer with Mystery at the Museum was really cool. I know we're planning a spring promotion. We're going to do a summer promotion, and there's some good stuff that's coming along in the next little while. And then, how can I forget? We got a big party coming up in August.
That's going to happen.
That's really looking forward to that. And then, what is it? A week from Monday, I'm flying to Germany to go to the Beethoven, the project, Beethoven event in Bonn, Germany. Really excited to get to do that and get to meet geocachers from overseas and go out and play and find some caches. So on a personal level, I'm excited, but I think from a company perspective, there's a lot of people here that are really excited about just taking things to the next level. So a lot of things in the works. As I said, a really robust roadmap, both for development teams and community teams alike. But it's going to be a fun year.
Nice. Well, Bryan, GSM ×2, R. Reagan, we appreciate all of you coming on tonight to talk about refreshing the game board and some of the other topics that we touched on that seemed a little more random. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to speak to you guys. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Always fun. Thank you guys again.
Always fun.
Check the Cache Maniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the Geo Gearheads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cache Maniacs shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cache Maniacs shows. Geo Gearheads is produced by Chris Hoffenauer and Daryl Wanberg. This show is copyright 2020 by Daryl Wanberg. All rights reserved.
Cache with a Cache Media.